Hello everyone, and welcome to a History of Egypt podcast interview. Once again, my guest is Professor Peter Brand to discuss the life and reign of Ramesses II. If you don't already have it, Peter's book, Ramesses II, Egypt's Ultimate Pharaoh, is available at all good retailers, and it is easily the most thorough, authoritative, and up-to-date biography of this pharaoh ever produced. I highly recommend it. Peter has kindly joined us for a series of discussions about this ruler and why he is so famous and significant in Egyptian history. Today, we bring it all to a close: the last years, the death, and his legacy, and why Peter titled his book Egypt's Ultimate Pharaoh. Good morning, Professor Brand. Welcome back once again to the History of Egypt podcast. How are you today?
Doing well. It's glad to be here.
Very good. So, coming to the last years of Ramesses II, you note in The Ultimate Pharaoh that about halfway through his reign, really, after year 34, the actual records for Ramesses' deeds, his proclamations, his actions as a ruler really start to diminish compared to the first 3 decades. Speaking kind of speculatively, do you envision the king having retired into comfortable seclusion, or do you suspect he was still doing stuff and we've just lost the relevant records?
I think what we see is what we're talking about, the monumental record. After this exact midpoint, because year 34 and year 35, the time of the second Jubilee, is quite literally not just the halfway point, but one might argue the actual zenith of the reign. It's when he has the first Hittite marriage. We see the final retirement of the warrior king in his replacement by the god king. But that doesn't mean that everything comes to a standstill. The building program, especially with the Nubian temples, but also with other constructions within Egypt, continue. But as the decades roll by, he starts to run out of things to build and even places to add new inscriptions, and his ambitions in that sense decline. It's easy to argue that he was just getting too old to do this, and as we'll see, that at the very end of his reign, this is certainly the case. But the third quarter, if you will, he's still very much in charge, and he is doing things, even if he's not leaving us detailed historical inscriptions, even if he's not, going on campaign. And of course, the administrative documents such as we have shows that the bureaucracy is still humming along. And there have been scholars that have argued that this was a period of stagnation, but I think that's too simplistic. Now, once you get into the later 50s and certainly into the 60s of the reign, Ramses had become quite old indeed. He went into perhaps a kind of semi-retirement. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean that everything came to a grinding halt at this point.
Okay, so the later years of Ramesses II, if he comes to power at around 20, then by year 34, he's already in his mid-50s. By year 50, he's into his 70s. And by year 67, which is the final year, he's into his 80s at least, possibly early 90s by some estimates. How do you envision, based on the evidence, what Ramesses' life was like at the end?
Well, it's here that I think Ramses finally becomes a truly human figure. And the reason we can even say this is because we are privileged to have his physical remains as the ultimate artifact of his reign. We really get to see, past this grand facade of the huge statues and the glorious monuments, and especially at the end of his years when he's become this frail, decrepit old man who is at least 89 or 87 and perhaps as old as 92 when he dies. He suffers from this degenerative arthritis that has affected his spine, that he's hunched back and his neck is angled up, so that when he died, they had to literally break his neck to make his body life when they mummified him to lay in his coffin. He had great dental wear from just the grit in the bread that everybody got. Surprising dental wear just from grinding of the enamel from the diet, but he also had a lifetime access to sweets like honey and this kind of thing. with lots of decay and abscesses on his teeth that would have been very painful. Some of the softer tissues, such as eyes, are not preserved, so we don't know had he got. Almost certainly, he would have had pretty bad cataracts, but had he gone blind? We don't know. We don't know what his hearing was. They removed the brain, so we have no idea his mental faculties. Even if the brain was preserved, I don't know if we could have ever diagnosed, senility or any other kind of mental disorders from mummified brain tissue. But we do know he had, hardening of the arteries. We know all these different joint pains and other kind of physical ailments that he had. And so he's pretty bad shape, but he obviously had a kind of tenacious will to live and very good genes that carried him through to what essentially amounted to 3 times the average life expectancy. And when he dies, the number of people still alive in Egypt that were alive or could even, especially could still consciously remember the reign of his father would have been negligible. And so it must have been quite extraordinary. But he was in definitely bad shape. He had hip dysplasia, so he would have had to walk with a shuffle. And it's here that I think the idea of Ramses the great god, where it becomes a kind of cover for this frail, decrepit old man, where his palaces and his inner sanctums of his palace, he can reside like a god in his shrine, hidden from view, perhaps even from many of the courtiers, cared for by a close staff of trusted servants and members of the royal family, so that he is protected from view and protected from embarrassment. And one can only imagine, too, when these later Jubilee festivals that are still going on in the last years of his reign, there's one even at least planned, if not executed, in the very last year of his life. And there's no question that he's running the said festival ritual race. Were they carrying him around on the litter? Were one of the princes running the ritual race for him, or did they just like cancel that event altogether? I mean, even enthroning him on a dais in an open pavilion would have been something of a challenge. So, and it's very unlikely that this ritual that was supposed to revive and regenerate himself gave him much in the way of a comfort or benefit. So he would have been in truly bad shape. He would have not been much of an inspiration. If anything, probably would have been a dismaying sight. But again, to the extent that his mind was at all clear, I think he obviously had a tenacious will to live and the ability to live. And I think he would have ceded to power very reluctantly. So, it's almost like, to the extent that Merneptah was running the show, I wonder if it was a bit of like, taking the keys, to the car away from grandpa when he can't like see and doesn't have the coordination to drive anymore. I don't know. Or maybe the old fellow was basically so out of it, he didn't even know what was going on. And, it was not an issue and they were just keeping him going in senility when he was in his dotage.
So that brings us finally to his actual death. I'm now going to ask you to summarize everything you've learned about Ramesses within a single answer. You've titled the book Ramesses the Ultimate Pharaoh. It doesn't get more definitive than that in terms of how you're characterizing a ruler's significance within a lineage and their position within a imagined hierarchy of rulers. From your understanding of the Egyptian kingship, what is it about Ramesses' reign that is the most significant contribution to that concept? What makes him the ultimate pharaoh?
Well, the short answer, like to why he's the ultimate pharaoh in terms of the book, is because Ramses, Egypt's greatest pharaoh, was already taken. But why he's the ultimate pharaoh? The one thing is not the one thing. The one thing is all that stuff, and he does everything that a pharaoh is supposed to do, and everything a pharaoh is supposed to represent more and better than any pharaoh before or after. he reigns as long or longer than almost any other pharaoh. Pepi the second may have ruled longer. There are a few other pharaohs that ruled, about as long. But what he did with the amount of time he had is extraordinary. There were pharaohs that had similar military careers that were actually often more successful or more impressive. But Ramses' military career was nothing to sneeze at. And, Kadesh wasn't nearly the debacle that it was made out to be. But certainly the celebration of it was not just over the top, but also as an information war or as a celebration or sort of a public relations event. It was very successful. Again, other kings built large monuments in large quantities, but few, if any, built them on the scale. In terms of stature, the only one that equaled or surpassed him was Amenhotep III. For all these reasons, you also think of the peace treaty, putting an end to a war with a period of intermittent hostilities that had been going on essentially for 80 years, off again and on again, but nobody had actually settled the problem. And then he finally made a definitive peace. Everything he did was everything the Pharaoh's supposed to do, and he doubled down on it. I also think that he is among the most innovative pharaohs. I mean, the Ramessides were often seen as sort of these stuffy conservatives or sort of a pale copy of the 18th dynasty or slavish imitators of previous traditions. But in fact, there's a huge amount of innovation in Ramses, the literary forms, the literary devices, the artistic forms, etc. Even when Ramses is, using old genres or old artistic narratives, there are so many innovative elements in iconography and structures and combinations of genres and styles, etc. Taking something like the royal cult and breathing new life in it and making it more exotic and more diverse, and just on a huge scale. All of these things are reasons, I think, that make Ramses the ultimate pharaoh. And when I say ultimate, it is like he's the epitome of what a pharaoh is supposed to be. If you looked up, the word pharaoh in the dictionary and there was a picture, it should be Ramses II.
Fair enough. So, Peter, that brings us to the end of a marathon series of conversations about Ramesses II. So once again, let me thank you very sincerely for taking the time to speak with us. I know on my end, it's been an absolute pleasure to go over these. I always think the ideas that you discuss, the perspectives are endlessly fascinating. And I know from many listeners who have left comments or emails that they've greatly appreciated these, and they always look forward to your appearances on the podcast. So from all of them and myself, thank you very much.
Thank you, and greatly enjoyed it.
If you have time, I'd like to ask you just a couple of light-hearted questions to close out.
Oh, sure, why not?
Who would be the second ultimate pharaoh? Who's the second best?
That's an interesting question. I can certainly say who among sort of some of the top five,
Sure.
and it depends on what you're looking for, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, on the one hand, Khufu, although I would say in many ways, Senefru. I mean, Khufu built one grand pyramid, but Senefru built two and a half or three, and also built all the prototypes. So I think he's one of the underrated pharaohs. Another one is, although again, Djoser, built the step pyramid, but actually one of the more impressive pharaohs behind it that sort of set the standard for the old kingdom and transitioned out of is Kamwasa. So I think Kasa Kemwe, sorry, those are the two sort of out of left field that I would say. In the New Kingdom, I think Moses III and Amenhotep III are the most obvious examples. In the Middle Kingdom, I would say Senwosret III, and Possibly, Montahotep second, Montahotep Nebuchadnezzar, the one that sort of unifies Egypt, that takes Egypt out of the first and immediate period for good.
All right. Okay. And second question, kind of just a general one. Suppose hypothetically you could go back in a time machine and speak to Ramesses II. What would you like to ask him?
Wow, that's a great question. I think like one of the things would be what exactly were his motives for finally, bearing the hatchet and making peace with the Hittites
Hmm.
would be one. Like, after Egypt had so stubbornly, and he himself had been so stubbornly fighting the Hittites. In terms of the Battle of Kadesh, one of the things I'd like to know is, what were his original plans and strategies? If, and to ask him, exactly, truthfully, exactly, how did things really go down there?
Mm.
Um, although I suspect he would just give me the party line, just like like he gave Hattusili the third in his letter. So I don't think I'd get him.
But perhaps you'd like to stand on a hillside with a telescope and just watch it play out.
Yeah, that would be the better way because I think he would just tell me, what he told because he believed his own hype.
Mhm.
That's one of the things that you find is, these guys believe their own press releases.
Very good. And finally, if you could spend a day with any one of the crown princes or princesses, who would you like to hang out with?
Of course, the standard answer would almost always be Kamwasa, I suppose, the scholar prince.
Hmm.
Uh,
And that's true for you too?
well, I mean, he's also the one we know so much about uh, that it's sort of hard. He's the one that has the most developed personality.
Hmm.
It's quite possible there's some other prince, languishing there in obscurity, or hiding in plain sight that'd be just as or more interesting um, conversationalist, or know more, have more scuttlebutt. Like,
Hmm.
uh, I wonder if Ramses Jr., first of all, having been under, the second fiddle for so long, uh, having to put up with his older brother, but then also having served as crown prince uh, up into the 50s of the reign. Presumably, if you could talk to him after having experienced all that, the stuff he would know
Mm.
about how things really went down in the palace, he would be a very interesting guy because he was literally at the center of the palace
Mm.
intrigue, and the political divisions, but also as crown prince, he would also had been very close to the king and would have known a lot about how things were in key parts of the reign. So
Very good. So, Peter, thank you once again. It's been a long road to get here, many hours of conversation, but I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say it's been a wonderful pleasure and we've greatly appreciated your expertise. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us and all the best.
thanks very much.